Hey, it's Citizen Cosmos. We're Sergeant Anna and we discover Cosmos by chatting with awesome people from various teams within the Cosmos ecosystem and the community. Join us if you're curious how dreams and ambitions become code.
Hey everyone, and welcome to Citizen Cosmos. And we are glad to have Gregory Landua, and I hope I'm pronouncing that right, with us today. Gregory is the co-founder and co-chief regeneration officer, and he's going to tell us all about what that means, of Regen Network. He's also the co-founder and the CEO of Terra Genesis International, co-author of Regenerative Enterprises, a regenerative agriculture practitioner and a farmer. And I'm having a hard time here. I'm really sorry, Gregory, if I got that really wrong. I'm going to go to you and ask you to help me out a little bit. Tell me, what does all of that mean? All this regeneration thing and the regeneration officer. I'm just going to let you speak.
Yeah, Serge, Anna, it's great to be on the show. Thanks for doing this for the whole community. Yeah, what the heck is regeneration and why did I use it in all of my titles of everything? Oh my gosh. So what regeneration means to me, you could think of it in a couple of different ways. One way is sort of thinking about life itself and, what does it mean to engage in life and business and our economy in such a way that actually improves the evolutionary viability and the vitality of animals and plants and humans and other businesses and the ecosystem at large, which I think is really resonant with the way that I see, the best way that I see sort of the cooperation of open source, distributed, decentralized movements like Cosmos operating. There's a kernel of regenerative potential there, which is regeneration is intrinsic in life. And so I'm an ecologist. I'm always thinking about these sort of metaphors and mimicking what we see in the natural world. And so commonly misunderstood attributes of evolution, like Herbert Spencer and, social Darwinism and all of these things where people are saying, oh, it's survival of the fittest and, red in tooth and claw. But actually, if you look at the biology and you look at the ecology, the species that tend to survive aren't the fittest in that classical definition of like the most competitive. They're the species that the most other species depend on. The more other entities that depend on a tree or depend on an animal, the more likely they are to, over time, continue to survive. And so there's this larger system, and we as organisms, we as individuals, we as businesses are nested within those systems. And what regeneration means to me is, in a way, it's idealism, but in a way, it's pragmatism. In a way, it's just sort of asking, what does it take to be a business, to be an enterprise that serves the vitality and viability of other stakeholders and therefore is able to co-regenerate through time. And so that's one way of talking about it. Another way that I just want to, make sure is grounded for guests is around our mission at Regen Network, which is really around focusing on what I would call the restorative and regenerative potential of nature, of agriculture, of forests, of oceans, to solve almost every single societal and economic problem we face. Climate change, pollution, health issues, pandemics, they all come from a common source, which is degradation and extraction and externalization of costs in such a way that the system is less strong and less vital and less vibrant. And in this sort of soliloquy or monologue with the last bit of this, which is Regen Network is really aiming to use mechanism design to create new games, new economic games in which multiple stakeholders who are sourcing livelihood, food, fuel, fodder, all of vocations from landscapes, which is the classical commons, in such a way that regenerates those commons through the exchange instead of degrading them, right? And so we want to break people out of the standard prisoner's dilemma. And that is totally possible. It's completely achievable, but it's a mechanism design challenge. And that's why Regen Network is so passionate and excited about distributed technology, proof of stake networks, and other forms of creating consensus, because that creates the building block for us to engage in mechanism design around commons management, new markets, and all of these things that we believe actually transform the relationship between the human economy and the greater than human economy, which is our living world.
It's interesting that you say all that, because lately I've been hearing like all around the space, not just blockchain space. I mean, generally, a lot of people talking about comparing blockchain to a living organism, whether this is like mycelium or comparing blockchain to forests. I personally love the comparison to mycelium because I think it's amazing how similar those things are. And it's really interesting that you say that. And I'm really excited, to be honest with you, because this is two of my favorite topics, blockchain and ecology. A little bit before we go forward, can you speak a little bit more about Regen Network and its mission? Because you mentioned it a few times while you were saying what regeneration is. So, and I think a lot of people are confused as to what you guys do. And I think maybe you can describe it.
Well, apologies for the confusion. I mean, I think part of that is because it's always hard, at what level you speak to. Maybe sometimes we're speaking about the world that we're trying to create together. And in other times, we're speaking about a very practical value proposition where it's like, here's our users and here's what we're trying to build right now. Whereas, here's the future that we're trying to create, right? So I'll start with the very concrete value proposition that we're working on right now. I'll sort of try to create a stack of first here and then there, like what's our immediate go-to-market strategy? And how does that relate to the blockchain and who are our users? And then, like what comes next in layers. So our immediate go-to-market strategy at Regen Network really is focused on new class of payment for ecosystem services. Ecosystem services right now are carbon credits, payment for water quality, biodiversity. There's a number of different things that currently companies, governments, and individuals actually participate in markets to pay for previously externalized costs because they get the benefits of those services, those ecosystem services. And it's somewhere, depending on who you ask, between $40 and $200 billion a year of industry. And it is estimated that industry is estimated to move upwards to at least $1 trillion a year in the next 10 years as Paris Climate Agreement, corporations and municipalities are taking all of this very seriously. There's been quantified risk associated with actuary tables of insurance companies around climate change. Like business people are taking it seriously and they understand that they have to incorporate environmental risks into their balance sheet. Our go-to-market strategy is to provide superior, you might say fintech, eco-fintech services where we overcome some of the existing double counting problems, some of the existing verification issues by using a distributed public ledger, using public proof of stake blockchain in which these digital assets that represent living assets, like the state of a forest, the health of soil, can be easily audited by all parties and exchanged, in the coming inter-blockchain world between different registry systems without having double counting. So we're very focused on just providing that value for an existing marketplace that needs that value.
You address to one of the biggest problem for the modern society is the problem of external effects. Yeah, you try to measure it in a proper way and you understand the economic game behind it, and using blockchain you can solve this problem. It's quite interesting because in traditional new institutional economy we tend to say that it's kind of problem but we don't know how to solve it. Yeah, until recently. Is it economic game behind it? So is it something that you think will help us, or some kind of people we need to push them to change this old system to the new way to do this?
That's a great question. And so I think that's where, maybe that's the next layer in our value proposition, which is asking the question, how do you actually transform the game? So when I was talking about our go-to-market strategy, I'm talking about, okay, there's this existing market. We can build something that's incrementally better, and we can compete in that existing market, providing this, new service that's unlocked by blockchain technology. And what you're asking is really about, okay, but how do we transform the system itself? Our core hypothesis here is that what we need in order to transform the system is information parity. Currently, the reason that costs can be externalized, I don't know how many of your listeners or if you are aware of the fact that Exxon, a clear understanding of climate change, created by their own science team in 1971. They hid that information from the public instead of revealing that information and changing their business model. And so there's a perverse incentive. That's bad market dynamics. It's bad for them. They're going to bear the brunt. They optimize for short-term profit at the expense of that business's long-term viability as an energy producer, as well as at the expense of massive economic and ecological catastrophe for many different people. So they made a very bad choice. And that choice was made possible by a lack of information parity. So a lack of ability of the market to have real information signals to appropriately price, for instance, gasoline versus other things. How do you transform a market? To me, it's all about the right information signaling. And so how do we realign the economics of agriculture, the economics of land use, the economics of energy in such a way to have the appropriate price signaling and the appropriate commons management integration with our economy? To me, it's all about information integrity, data integrity, various mechanisms for data quality. We see the exact same game theoretic and economic scenarios playing themselves out with the surveillance capitalist business model and Google and Facebook. It's the exact same scenario of optimizing short-term economic gain at the expense of trust, at the expense of societal integrity, at the expense of truth in some way. And so there's a need to sort of realign incentives and create the appropriate mix of what is private and what is public, and how do you create the right market conditions so that balance is appropriate. And in our case, we want to make ecological state information so ubiquitously available and cheap that markets can appropriately internalize the signals around ecological regeneration versus ecological degradation in business decisions at zero marginal cost.
I'm happy for myself because I understood Regen Network correctly. I'm going to say hooray because it's a complicated explanation and I love it because it's a very good explanation. And it definitely gives me much more insight than I had before. Now, the question I have, and I think most of people who listen to this will ask the same question, how on earth does one prove to someone the current state of the forest using data and so on and so forth, or maybe not a forest, or maybe the current state of the soil on this particular piece of land? I mean, how does one understand the value of this particular piece of soil or the state of that particular piece of land and exchange it with someone else? Provably, obviously, and in a trustless way.
Well, I mean, I think there's multiple ways to answer this, and so it's going to be another complex answer. The most important thing here is essentially good science. And good science is not objective, it's intersubjective. Ecological science is not deterministic, it's probabilistic. There is no way where you have any kind of ironclad, there is X units of carbon in this soil or in this forest in a deterministic way. This isn't the Bitcoin blockchain. This isn't just math. This is the real world. And the real world is quantum and probabilistic. And so what is important, and the value proposition here, is the foundation is who said what about where, when. What data did they use? What methodologies did they use? And is the data that they used to make a claim available or not? Is the methodology that they used available or not? And who else is using that methodology? And can you create can you rate the quality of the data, etc., so that the uncertainty, again, can be appropriately priced in to the value of the asset? Okay, so that's the foundation. The foundation is not a system in which we're trying to make a deterministic claim around the state of an ecosystem that leads to a quantified or empirical claim about the units of value that are somehow fungible in the market. The foundation is to create information parity around the methodology, the data, and ecological asset so that the market can appropriately price in the risk of the claim in a really quick and easy way. So that's the foundation, right, that we're building on. Now I'll actually answer, what does it look like to do that well? To build a best-in-class digital asset that represents ecological value that can be traded or accounted for in some way. Like, how can you prove the health of a forest? Okay, well, that one's actually quite easy. To be able to prove the health of the forest, you have tools such as satellite imagery. Those tools, you can pull satellite imagery from publicly available repositories. We have Sentinel-2, Sentinel-1 from the Copernicus program of the European Space Agency. We have Landsat from NASA. Those are 3 large data sets that are publicly available. You also have privately available, a growing, crazy amount of privately available satellite information. All of our assumptions about how to verify the state of an ecosystem are again about intersubjective correlative claims. If you want a more rigorous claim about the state of an ecosystem, you probably want multiple different ways of claiming it. You don't want to pull satellite information from the European Space Agency as well as, NASA. If you want to be really rigorous, you want some third-party verifier who has a bond that could be slashed to go take a smartphone photo and fly a drone. Okay, then you have this information, multispectral imagery, gives you clear information about the ecosystem type, and all of this other historical information. You can then correlate that, essentially, to either empirical models or process-based models, or you can actually go out and quantify in person, in situ. There's all these different scientific methods to then quantify particular pieces, right? So either you correlate that and you say, for instance, we have 3 matching attestations from 3 different uncorrelated satellite providers that forest in the Amazon is there. And it's been there for this long. And we know that's true. And we have these 2 methodologies that were independently developed that give us indicators based on a similar forest type of biodiversity and carbon. That is essentially how you create a quantifiable claim about ecosystem service. And what we're doing, which is crazy to me that it's radical because it just makes sense, we're just creating a distributed ledger that essentially replicates, in essence, the healthiest expression of the scientific process, where all of those statements are made and they can be fact-checked and they can be audited by anyone who would like. And that's what Regen Ledger makes possible in the translation of physical natural capital asset to a digital representation of that asset that can become tradable or fungible.
Hey, who's that?
This is Obi. He just brought me some hot chocolate.
Hey, Obi.
Yay!
So yummy. Thank you.
I must admit, I'm still a bit concerned as to how the market is going to decide on probabilistic value for certain assets. But I think this is like a really long debate that we can have here.
Well, let's talk about that for a second. Let's talk about how the market currently approaches that. So currently what happens is did the right expert organization sign off that this is good? So if the UNCCC or IPCC or a third-party organization that's a business like Vera, this is how things work currently in most things, right? Is like, did this big centralized body sign off on it? So our system, that is completely backwards compatible, right? You can completely have a scenario in which an asset is checked off by some sort of like trusted party, but you can also go further and you can say, in addition to it being checked off, here you can see these following attributes, and here's the data and the algorithm and these other pieces. I believe that the market over time is going to mature so that assets that have the optimal public-facing transparency that can be machine audited will be the most competitive, because you reduce the marginal cost to evaluate the risk of a claim to next to zero. But in the short term, there's still going to need to be backwards compatibility, and you're still going to need assets to be reviewed by some trusted party. And that's where you can easily be sort of seeing that you can integrate things like curation registries, and there are different identities in the system, and have they signed off on that asset or not? We're building all of that scaffolding out because that's what people need right now. But in the long term, I do pretty firmly believe that a system is incapable of dealing with the complexity of reality because there's perverse incentives. And we see those perverse incentives, and people no longer trust institutions because of that variety of different scenarios. And so we have to be forward-looking, and we have to be asking, how will the market be valuing truthiness or integrity in the future? And that's through this sort of more radical transparency about certain elements. It's trustless that who said what about where, when. That's the important piece. Now, rating that and correlating it with things, you may have prediction markets, you may have all sorts of an ecosystem of different ways that people will approach that. But the foundation is that the appropriate information is able to be provided to underpin the value of an asset.
So when we're speaking about short-term and long-term perspective, what is the minimum number of users that we need to overcome that limit than everyone thinking their opportunistic way in short-term period?
That's a great question. I mean, and that's one for the ages, I think. I don't know if you all are familiar, if your listeners are familiar with sort of like game B theory.
In a couple words, yeah, you can explain it. I think it's easy.
So game A is sort of this competitive, short-term thinking, marketplace-driven world we exist in. And when was that world first born? Who knows? Was it 10,000 years ago with the rise of agriculture, or was it 200 years ago with the rise of the joint stock company? Who knows? Anyway, we have a texture of it. We live it. We live in a world in which it's usually better to take the short-term gain option if you're just thinking about your own selfish interest. But we also can see how that actually doesn't really work, because those people, there's costs that are accrued. Okay, so game B is the idea that that it's more competitive to be sort of like to have the appropriate reciprocity in a system over a long term. So game A, game B. In order for game B to work, it actually needs to outcompete game A. And the way that it does that is it needs to attract more creativity, more productivity, and more vibrancy in a societal way, where it kind of can then sort of extract value from game A and turn it into good things. Okay, so there's a constant conversation in this community that sort of frames things as game A and game B about what's the tipping point. How many people need to be engaged in a game B style? How many companies, how many individuals, maybe even countries, in order for the system to actually shift, right? Which is me just sort of reframing your initial question. I would guess it needs to be somewhere around 2% of the population of the planet.
Is that number based on something, or is that just why 2%? Why not 42?
Yeah, it's based on different research around societal, big societal changes. And I'm sorry, I can't quote the actual resources. These studies that have been done around societal change, when a norm radically changes one way or the other, how many active people in a society need to actually be sort of like bought into something? And it's somewhere less than 4% that need to be actively participating and or not even necessarily active, but sympathetic even, right? Just adjacent to and willing to sort of like be like, no, I actually believe that. I actually believe those sorts of things. Do I believe that we can get 1%, 2%, 3%, 4% of companies and individuals to essentially engage with this new economy based on sort of like climate forward and ecological health forward thinking? Yes. In fact, I would argue that we're basically already there. But that community needs tools to succeed. And so we're actually serving an existing user set. This is what I think is very different from Regen Network and many other crypto projects. Is we're very clear, like we have existing users and existing companies and existing governmental agencies. There's actually people who need the transformative tool that we're building. We have dialogues with them. We have partnerships with them. They're not just like, oh, build it and they will come. It's like they're real people who need this right now. And my guess is we're already over the tipping point, to be honest.
This is awesome. Oh, I love this. I love to hear this. And I think it's awesome to see that we have, well, at least a few projects that solving something real in Cosmos. And this is where I actually want to come to Cosmos, because I think it's a really good intro to what Regen Network does. So how did you guys choose Cosmos? How did you choose Cosmos Proof of Stake? I mean, I read it on your FAQ, obviously, on the website, why you didn't choose EOS and all that, but I don't think it should even be a question why you didn't choose EOS. Sorry to EOS lovers, but that's life. So how did you come to choose Cosmos?
We started in 2017, so I guess in crypto dog years, that's like 100 years old or something like that. Maybe not that old, but and at that point, Tendermint was out, right, as a core piece of technology. We knew very early on that we weren't willing to deal with Ethereum, although I love the community and the avant-gardeness and all of the different things, but we just essentially were not willing to engage with what we thought were sort of type 1 errors with technology design there. So we assumed in 2017 we were going to have to build it from the ground up, a full layer 1 all the way to the end application solution. And one thing we didn't want to have to build was a consensus engine. And so we were like, okay, well, we'll grab Tendermint and we'll build everything else. And that's what was in our white paper, essentially, was our system architecture paper, which described our approach to building technology and what we would do differently, which I think, interestingly enough, has played out. Leading layer 1 solutions have sort of like convened on essentially the roadmap that we set out ourselves, which I don't think they like read it and stole it. I just think that's like good thinking. It's like people are sort of like starting to form consensus around what's going to work, at least in some way. Your listeners are noticing and you're noticing our value proposition is kind of complex. We're like people on the impact and climate investment space think we're crazy because we're crypto project, and crypto people think we're crazy because we're like environmentalists or something, and they're like, there's no business in that. And so we've had to build our community in a very slow, methodical way, and there was no big ICO moment, and we've been slow to fundraise. We've just sort of continued to just like slowly build community and product and relationships. So therefore, the Cosmos SDK caught up with us, essentially. We converged, and then we took the Cosmos SDK, and we said, this is fantastic. You know, maybe there's a bunch of things we don't have to do. We'll use the proof of stake mechanisms, and we'll do these other things, and we'll sort of launch in that way. We'll make some additions, et cetera, et cetera. And then, because we sort of have users in a use case, and we're saying, hey, wait, key management. No. This isn't built in the way that we're going to be able to achieve what we need with our users. Oh, hey, wait, there's all these issues with the SDK. So then we started working on those issues and we started sort of like creating a backlog and doing pull requests and then doing some contracting work. And then eventually, you know, push comes to shove and this, that, and the other, and ecosystem realignment and etc. And, and now Regen Network, I think, is playing a substantial role in actually maintainership and forwarding the SDK itself. Essentially, according to the uses, the user needs that we ourselves had for the SDK pushed us to propose many things, which I think is a really cool thing about why the Cosmos ecosystem is going to be such a force in the crypto community, is that as different projects pick up the tool and they say, wait a second, in order for this to really work for our sovereign domain-specific community, this has to be true. And then you like recursively go back down the layers and you say, what needs to be true for us to get this functionality? And then you create pull requests and you cooperate and you think things through and then you build something that's better and then you get up to your solution. And I think soon we're going to have a modular ecosystem. And in the next year or so, we're going to have a very powerful modular ecosystem in which the community that comes next, the projects, like we were very early in the ecosystem and we just sort of like rolled our sleeves up and got to work. Even though it wasn't necessarily our end use case, we just felt like these things have to be true for our value proposition to happen in the right way. So just roll our sleeves up and we'll dig in and we'll start working on it. And a lot of groups have done that. It's not just Regen Network. And that's a beautiful thing about Cosmos. And the projects that come later, the next generations of projects, are going to benefit from that. And the marginal cost of deploying a sovereign blockchain zone to meet user needs is going to come down and down and down and down until the point where it will just be simply deployable in the state that can meet user needs with some good user-centered design and some good integrations with existing technology. And I'm super excited for the ecosystem to be moving towards that. I still think we're probably about 18 months or 2 years from that moment, to be honest.
So are we still in game A in terms of Cosmos?
Well, I would frame, to move back to that framing, I think Cosmos is an example of a proto-B community. We're still engaged, many of us, in different ways with game A, and maybe some community members are all the way game A, and some are further along the spectrum and whatever. But as a community, there's cooperation, there's a different culture and a different ethos that's emerged, and I think there's mutualism and incentive alignment, and we're answering really important questions about governance. Sometimes we reinvent the wheel, sometimes we don't. So I think we're like a proto-B community. In terms of just the practicality of like where we're at technologically speaking, I think teams that are coming in right now are going to benefit a lot from a lot of heavy lifting that our team and others have done. And I think in the next 6 months, 8 months, it's like there's like a happening taking place in that. Like every 6 months, I think it's going to get twice as easy, essentially, for new groups to come in and leverage the technology, basically.
Makes sense.
I just want to say that changing the game, it's not the just point, it's kind of a process. So we cannot just change the game in one moment. And in Cosmos, we can see that we are in the middle of changing and transformation process.
Let's get to some personal questions, if you don't mind, here, a little bit about you, because a lot of the idea of our podcast is to get to know the person behind the project a little bit. And if you feel like they're a bit personal, one thing a bit obvious for me about what you do, like you personally, nothing to do with Regen Network, that something is wrong with the planet and that needs a change.
I was very young. I mean, I remember a couple of key moments. I grew up in Alaska.
That's cool.
Yeah, it's beautiful. I mean, I miss it all the time, but it's a beautiful place. So in growing up, I sort of played every different role in the salmon fishery there. I was a fisherman. I worked for the Department of Fish and Game. I worked for a local community science group that was doing things. All these different roles. I sort of got to see this resource extraction from growing up all the way through. And then college, I studied environmental science and, ecology and other things. I continued to work in that, sort of work around different things. And I just have to say, like, that our fishery in Alaska is considered to be one of the best managed natural resources in the world. And it's crazy how bad it is. That was always how I just was like, what a mess. This is crazy. It could be so much easier than that, right? And so I think I just got a real sense of like all of these different roles in an ecosystem and how we could, if we rewrote the game, if we chose to rewrite the game we were playing, we would have such radically better outcomes for all of the players. Instead of every player trying to just win the existing game, I became very passionate about what does it look like to rewrite the game itself. What does that look like?
Yeah, that's really cool. I like that. When you say that the fishery was a mess, what do you mean by that? That's quite interesting. I mean, at least to me, I mean, I don't know what it means in terms. Was it like badly treated, the animals, or was...
Well, no, I mean, the fishery is sustainable, so they don't overfish it. But there are all these little ways that there's still the game that's played. People like, it's the choices that were made in that fishery to manage that common resource. And it's a classical commons management example. Market-based mechanisms. For instance, there's a limited number of licenses for fishermen. There's a bidding and lottery system to give out any excess licenses, and you can sell your license to someone else. So there's essentially a license market. So I, as a fisherman, can sell my license privately to somebody else, then they have but there's only X number of those. And if you come in and you don't have a license, either the government will catch you or the fishermen who have their licenses, they're not going to put up with that. Like nobody, you don't just show up. They're Alaskans. Like Alaskans are like Texans squared. It's probably a lot like Siberia, Russia. These are hard people who grew up in a cold place with lots of guns. You don't go mess with people's livelihood. So anyway.
Lots of guns and lots of alcohol. Yeah, I like that.
Exactly. It's just that way. But fundamentally, the way that it's managed, it sends all these fishermen, salmon. I don't know if you know anything about salmon fishing, but all of the salmon are coming back to the same river every year. But in order to manage so that people compete in such a way to make the relative cost of getting those salmon high enough that not everybody wants to do it, we send the fleet out to sea to go catch the salmon out in the ocean instead of catching them in the river where they come back. Because we can't change the game such that we can create a game to manage the resource so as to not extract it. And I always thought that was crazy. The salmon are all coming to the river. Wouldn't you rather just throw a party like the Native American people used to do, catch a certain amount of the salmon right in the mouth of the river and create whatever other mechanisms to distribute that resource, market mechanisms or otherwise? It just makes more sense to me. Why waste all of this diesel fuel and danger? Everybody's got to go out into the ocean. It's very romantic and rugged and individualist, and it's the American way and all this stuff, whatever. But I always thought it was fucking insane, right? All the salmon, you know where they're coming. All you have to do is agree within a group of people to create a game that distributes that resource and respects its renewability through time. That seems to me like a not that hard a problem to solve. So I always thought it was crazy to send all of these fishermen out, and I was a fisherman for several years, and I loved it. It was very romantic. It's lovely, but it's insane. It's an insane waste of energy, essentially.
Yeah, that's crazy. I must admit, I'm not a big fisherman. I've been fishing before many times, but definitely the way I always perceived it is more of something that connects a person to the nature and not about, all the diesel and all those licensing. Like in my head, when you say that, it's a little bit creates this bureaucratic kind of mess. Do you know what I mean? I don't know how to explain that. So I understand what you're saying. Back to you. You're a farmer right now, right? As far as I understand. And that's what I read somewhere on your bio. You still farm, right?
So I garden, have a nice little garden, and I'm a co-owner of a pretty large cocoa, chocolate farm that also does sort of dynamic agroforestry. We grow plantains and bananas and avocados and citruses and yucca, cassava, and all sorts of things. Very diversified farm. So I currently, especially due to COVID, I haven't been able to visit that in a little while. That farm is in Ecuador, in part of a community that I've been engaged with for quite some time, about 10 years or so. That's when I reference my sort of farming. I'm really more of a tropical agroforester. And at this point, really just more of a shareholder in a tropical agroforestry farm. I'm not currently day-to-day farming.
Right. That's really cool.
Can I ask about avocado? Yeah, avocado question. Is it really so bad to eat avocado? Because I know that it's a water problem and the people just have to bring a lot of water to help growing avocados. So buying avocado in the average supermarket, it's considered some kind of bad thing now, because this action can kill a lot of the natural trees in the area that avocado growing up. Is that true?
That's a good question. It's all dependent. So you could grow avocados in a really beautiful way. And this is kind of what we're about at Regen Network, just to summarize, and I'll have to wrap after this. You can do any kind of agriculture in a beautiful regenerative way and in a really poor degenerative way. And so avocados can be grown, and generally are, in a way that is maximizing short-term yield and cutting down other forests and pumping out water from aquifers and just sending lots of chemical sort of grown avocados up to the supermarket. Or they can be grown as a more diversified agro ecosystem that doesn't extract water. And that depends on where you grow it, how you grow it, and many other things. Big question for me is, can a consumer discern between an avocado that's grown in a really great way, that's, really regenerative, or not? And I believe that most consumers would value the delicacy of a really well-grown avocado over an avocado that they knew was polluting water and degrading communities, and probably would choose not to eat an avocado, and they would just enjoy a really good avocado every once in a while. Because, my sense of people is that in general, people tend to make good decisions, and I'm very much not a economic determinist in this way. I think people actually are pretty usually, if they have all the information, they usually make good decisions for themselves, their families, the communities, and the planet. And it's when we don't have access to information that's the problem. So the fact that you can't tell if your avocado is grown regeneratively and organically, or if it was chemically and etc., and you just have to sort of generalize, and all avocados are not created equal. That's how I'll conclude. And I hope that in a couple of years, we'll be able to provide some support for consumers everywhere to know if their avocado was grown in a good way and is worth the money or not.
Yeah, cool, yeah.
It's a good conclusion. I like that, and it's really great. I said it probably twice, I think, throughout the podcast already. But I'm really glad to see that Cosmos has projects that solve real problems and not problems that are just exist only online or exist maybe in somebody's head. And I'm really glad to see that once again people that do that are really passionate about it.
Yeah, and not generate problem before solving it.
Yeah, that's another reason. That's true.
Another story.
That's another thing. Yeah, thanks for coming on, Gregory.
I was just agreeing. I think that's great, and I would count your project amongst those that I'm excited to see and continue to see you guys do good work, and that also is solving a very real problem. I'm excited to see what decentralized search and information curation looks like, and I think it's really important. And there's a lot of parallels, as you said, around how we do sense making and what the economics of that looks like. So I'm excited and look forward to being connected to you all. And thanks for providing the service to the community of hosting these conversations.
Yeah, thanks for coming on. Thanks everybody for listening, and join us next time for Citizen Cosmos with the masterminds behind the ecosystem. Thanks and bye.
Thank you. Bye.